First up, how much debt is Canada racking up? With the economy in a coma, that was the Prime Minister's term today, tens of billions of dollars in COVID spending already underway. The Parliamentary Budget Officer says we're way past the $150 billion deficit mark, and he wants to see a fiscal update urgently. But today, the Prime Minister said, you know what? That's not going to happen because the economy says just too unpredictable. The numbers wouldn't be worth anything. So should the government be giving a more clear picture of Canada's financial health? Tomorrow, by the way, there will be legislation tabled to crack down on CERB fraudsters. Is jail time really the answer? Let's call in MPs to get some answers. Kevin Lamoureux is a Liberal MP and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader. Dan Albas is a Conservative MP and the party's Employment and Workplace Development Critic. And Daniel Blaikie is the NDP's Employment and Deputy Finance Critic. Gents, good to have all of you on the program. Mr. Blaikie, I just got to start with you because now we've heard Mr. Singh won't support any bill that cracks down on CERB fraudsters. I'm just trying to put that on understanding. If there is a due process, and if people are found to have been committing fraud on this program, why would your party not want the government to crack down on that?
Well, I think you zeroed right in on it there, Evan. The question is due process. So when we start, what the government is doing in this legislation is introducing a new term about a reasonable offer to return to work or a reasonable return to work. And that's part of the regime against which Canadians could have penalties assessed if they attest that they feel that it wasn't safe to go back to work, and later it's found out that in some government officials' opinion it was reasonable. They could now go to jail, they could face fines, and what we're insisting is that the government do a far better job, in fact that they try at all, to define what a reasonable return to work is. So there's no onus on employers here to provide a safe work plan that addresses physical distancing, sanitization procedures, PPE. Those are things that I think Canadians should be able to expect from their employer, and that I think the government should require an employer to give to their employees in order to establish that a return to work is reasonable. So what we've got here is a government that's saying, here's all the penalties, here's the book we're going to throw at you if you don't go back to work, and no expectation about what the employer owes employees to give them some real certainty that it is in fact safe to go back to the workplace.
Dan Albas, your party's called on this for a long time, the crackdown on CERB fraudsters. There's only a draft bill, I should say, but is the government, in your view, taking the right approach to this, or do you agree with the NDP that it's too hazy?
Well, Evan, let's just go back a few weeks ago. When we raised this in the House of Commons, I raised it directly to the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, and they told us, no, everything is just fine. We have enough integrity measures on the back end. And lo and behold, now we see media reports saying that they're going to be significantly tightening this up. Look, we know that the economy is uncertain for many Canadians. Some provinces are opening up, some industries are, but many aren't. So we need to make sure we balance getting supports to Canadians, but making sure that value for money is there. Look, nothing gets people more riled up than seeing their tax dollars being given to the wrong people. And when I asked the Prime Minister about this, he couldn't give a straight answer, and I bet you we won't get a straight answer from the Liberals today.
Well, we can find out. Mr. Lamoureux is here. Can you please respond to both of those? How will your government determine what is a reasonable return to work? And how will your government parse what the Prime Minister said today? Well, if people make an error, we're not going to crack down on them. How are you going to determine that?
Well, I think what's important, Evan, and this is a very straightforward answer, Canadians understand and they can appreciate that the first priority of this government and the Prime Minister was to make sure that when we were hit with the COVID or the coronavirus, that we are protecting families, we're protecting small businesses, and as much as possible, providing the programs that are going to keep that disposable income for people that is in great demand and real need. Now, when you're issuing out millions of people or millions of people are applying for these programs, there will be, unfortunately, some people that will be abusive and take advantage of that. We have a system that's going to be in place to ensure that the taxpayer is going to be protected. But at the end of the day, it's about ensuring that families are going to have the resources that are necessary in order to be able to sustain themselves.
Well, Mr. Lamoureux, but I'm not asking, but hold on. with respectfully, you're answering a question I did not ask. I'm not asking you to defend the reason why you put the money out the door quickly. We're asking you to defend how you're going to fulfill your promise to crack down on what you say are fraudsters. So can you define what a reasonable return to work is? The NDP is concerned that it's too hazy, and the Conservatives are concerned that you won't be able to tell the fraudsters from people who just say, you know what, I made a mistake. Can you tell us how you're going to do those two things?
Well, I think that we have civil servants, some of the best civil servants in the world. We have mechanisms currently that are in place. And at the end of the day, there will be a proper timing and way to ensure that the taxpayer is in fact protected, while at the same time ensuring that families and individuals are getting the finances that they need in order to sustain themselves going forward. And I think that's what the population would like to see the government do.
Mr. Blaikie, is that a good enough answer for you?
Well, no, because it doesn't address at all what a reasonable return to work would look like. I think it bears mentioning, Evan, the CERB's only been around for a couple of months. The revelations of the Panama Papers were years ago. I wish we could have seen this kind of hasty action when it came to corporate tax frauds, as we're seeing for people who are, trying to navigate very difficult circumstances, being asked to attest to whether in their opinion, it's reasonable to go back or not. Now, the attestation worked in the beginning because there were no penalties, and we already heard stories, I'm sure CTV covered many stories, of people had a lot of anxiety about attesting to whether they made $5,000 of income last year because they thought maybe it was only $4,900. There's a lot of goodwill out there and a lot of honest Canadians who, if they don't know from government what counts as a reasonable reason, if you'll forgive the redundancy there, to say no to going back to work, are going to feel pressure to go back to workplaces that they feel are unsafe because they don't want to end up in jail or paying a massive fine. And so if the goal of the government, and I heard this from Mr. Lamoureux, is to have income support available to people to get them through this time, that means that people have to be able to apply for that. And if they're more worried about going to prison or paying a fine, we're going to have a lot of people who need that help that aren't going to want to apply for it, and then the program doesn't work anyway. And it's in nobody's interest to have a bunch of people default on their mortgage.
So what we're going to do is we'll wait to see the final legislation tomorrow, but I want to just quickly, in the couple minutes I've got, Mr. Albas, I want to just go back to you, sir. What about the need for a fiscal update? The Prime Minister today said, you know what, it would be useless to do it now. We're still in this, quote, unprecedented time. How urgent is it, in your view, to need a fiscal update in terms of what the government has spent so far and where the deficits and debt are going?
Well, when you have the parliamentary budget officer telling members of parliament and senators that he can't give an honest answer as to where our finances are, and when Conservative members ask questions of Bill Morneau, the Minister of Finance, he refuses to give any specifics. When we ask to see whether or not the Auditor General will get the resources that she needs to be able to look at the massive increase of public spending just in the past 2.5 months, not to mention the amounts that they spent before, we've hit this patch due to COVID-19, Evan. Having more transparency is important in our system. Having oversight is tremendously important. I asked the Minister of Employment last week what the status of the EI fund. She said she'd get back to me. And you know what? She sent me a note saying, check the public accounts from last year, and they'll be published again later this year. That's not open. That's not a transparent government. And this Prime Minister made that commitment to Canadians. And now with all this money coming out the door, we need to have that. So a fiscal update is absolutely called for.
Okay, Mr. Lamoureux, last word on this. Why not? You're a minority government. There are very few people that have questioned the need for the urgent spending. We all, most Canadians support the idea that in this COVID, these programs have been highly necessary. Now, there's a debate about how much, and there's lots of debates about them. But why not a fiscal update? And if the numbers are moving so quickly, fine. Do a second fiscal update if the first one's out of date. What's the problem with that?
I think what we need to recognize, Evan, is that Ottawa is working in collaboration with the different provinces. Every week, virtually, you have the Prime Minister on conference calls with the premiers. There's a lot of public dollars that are being spent. In the last 7 days, literally hundreds of millions of dollars allocated to support provinces in dealing with healthcare. There's announcements that were made to support people with disabilities. These are all things that are happening on an ongoing basis. It's not as easy to say, well, let's provide an economic update today and then revise it a week from now. I think that we got to remain focused on working with our different partners, in particular our provinces, and make sure that we have the programs that are going to assist the economy.
What about Parliament? What about Parliament?
But shouldn't oversight? Why should oversight be taking a back seat to speed? Is that the argument you're making? We're spending too fast for any oversight? Is that legitimately the argument you're putting forward?
Not at all. We're ensuring that there's more accountability in terms of transparency in the House of Commons on the floor of the chamber than I have ever seen. As a parliamentarian for over 30 years, we get over 90 minutes a day of questions and answers of the government from Monday to Thursday, inclusive. We're going to be sitting 4 days during the summertime. These are things that are ensuring that opposition, today, if they wanted to, they could be asking questions about the estimates. The opportunities and the tools are there for opposition to hold government to account, as they should be. And we're supporting that. We are encouraging, as much as possible, collaboration, that Team Canada approach. Let's make sure we get to where we need to be so our economy can be where it should be as we try to get out of this situation.
Mr. Lamoureux, Mr. Albas, and Mr. Blaikie, unfortunately, I got to leave it there. We'll watch that legislation that will be tabled tomorrow. And thank you so much, gents. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.